afternoon, City of Rochester. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of the Equity Alliance Equity Series. I did a check this morning, and this would be our 28th episode. So thank you for those who have been with us from the very beginning, and a very big welcome to those who are joining us today for the very first time. I'd like to begin with a brief introduction of myself. My name is Chamwatela. I have the great pleasure of serving the City of Rochester as a Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Director. I'm joined by my counterpart, Wafa El Khalifa, who serves Destination Medical Center as the Equitable Development Manager. We began the Equity Alliance about 2 years ago with the hope of creating a community of practice, a really collaborative equity practice space. And so for those who have been here, we know that we share best practices. Hopefully we implement those in our spaces, but hopefully we also take some questions with us with the idea of figuring out how we design public policy in a way that centers equity and thinks about Rochester not just about this moment, but the community that we want to be in 10, 20, 30 years from now, and very much centering all people, right? Ensuring that as we grow, not just some folks are included in that growth, but everyone is part of that process. And as part of that, we thought it would be really useful to have Ashley Oolman, who is the Chief Equity Officer from the state of Minnesota, join us to share with us a little bit about what is happening in her space. And I love that she chose this title for today, Meeting the Moment, Community-Led Systems Change. What is happening in her space? How can we collaborate? What are new learnings and findings from the state level that we can apply in the city, in our private organizations, nonprofits, municipal governments, etc. I just wanted to share that in her work, she leans into multidisciplinary, innovative approaches to remove barriers and solve challenges at administration, enterprise, and statewide levels. And so with that, I will stop sharing my screen and we'll welcome Ashley into our space. Please give her a warm Rochester welcome. You can do that by introducing yourself in the chat, letting us know how you're showing up to this space today. And with that, I'll pass it on to Ashley.
Hello, everyone. It took me a moment to share my screen, which I think I'm doing. I'm looking at you, Chow. Can you see the screen? Excellent. I see folks nodding, so that makes me think that you can hear what I'm putting down. So good afternoon, everyone. I'll start by giving a quick visual description. As Chow said, my name is Ashley Storm Oolman, Chief Equity Officer, and I join you today with a popping pink lip, long braids, and a black turtleneck sweatshirt because it is getting into cozy season, as y'all know. I'm so grateful to be here with you today to talk about, meeting the moment, both in the turbulent times that we find ourselves living and working in, but then also uncovering the work that I've been doing all along anyway, work that's meant to essentially make Minnesota the best state to grow up in, no matter where you are, no matter who you are. So I'm so grateful to be here talking about how my work translates community priorities into systems change, especially as it relates to meeting the moment that we find ourselves in. All right, so I'm going to advance to the next slide. Just a bit about the session and the topics that I prepared for today. As I mentioned, the times that we're living and working in, of course, have been challenging. A good way to put it in Minnesota terms would be air quote interesting, turbulent, certainly harmful for many. Unprecedented is another common word that I hear, but I've also been hearing since 2020, and so we might need to come up with a different one to describe the times. But ultimately, it's one thing to be a supporter of community, to be a community organizer or leader, or a person who designs or develops policy. Maybe you run a nonprofit or a bank. And if you're in this space, I suspect you are here because no matter what it is that you do, you recognize that your work has the potential to impact people in both positive or negative ways. And if you're choosing to be here during your lunch hour, I suspect it's that you recognize the power of your positionality and you have a desire to make impact in the positive direction. Many of y'all know that the federal administration that is in place now has made a lot of that type of work more challenging. And so this conversation is really meant to make sure that I leave or don't leave the space without making sure that you all know about some of the most critical resources that have developed that are available so that we can navigate federal impacts to the best of our ability. I will also make sure I consider myself a professional hype woman, and so I will make sure that you all are clear on some contacts and subject matter experts. We have, honestly, y'all, some of the most incredible practitioners, both within the state enterprise and outside of the state as well. And so I really want to make sure that you all know about all of those folks, the type of work they do, where they do their work, and how to be a part of that as well. And then by the time I wrap up this lunch break with you all, I will also make sure to share just a bit about the work that I do, how I approach it, and if you're interested in staying in touch or getting involved, how you can do that as well. Um, Ultimately, what I'd really like to do is just make sure that folks have available to them the same tools that we're using, that you have an idea of the direction we're going in, particularly as it pertains to not only meeting the moment, but ensuring that we're keeping community at the center of it all. So I will start out at the federal response space. I think many of you all are, likely no stranger to the realities that we've all been navigating for a good 10, 11, 10 and a half months now. And so in case you've got curiosities just about how that umbrella impacts the work that we do or what's been happening at that level, I wanted to make sure that I was sharing those things. I'm going to make sure, give me one sec. I'm going to navigate so I can split screens on the one you can't see. Give me just a moment. I'm not a real millennial, y'all, so hopefully this goes well. There we go. Okay. So, the first couple of things that I wanted to share and why I wanted to pull up my notes here is to make sure that I shared just a couple of things that happen on a recurring basis at the governor's office level. Since January, right out of the gate, we've had a daily touchdown with the senior staff team. A lot of that work is essentially meant to lift up the most recent high level decisions. So, were there executive orders passed? Are there court cases that are now in play that are relevant to the work that's happening? Are there potential federal actions that might be coming to Minnesota or that could impact Minnesota? In one way or another. I would say we're talking about headlines, we're talking about high level memos, but we're also talking about, communities impacted, whether that be based on geography, service recipients, et cetera. As you can imagine, it's pretty high octane, fast paced. I think many of us, depending on what kind of pocket your work is in, maybe even living day by day as it pertains to like federal shutdown updates. And so it's been really important that we stay connected to the big changes, big decisions that are either happening or maybe on the way, so that we can assess the impact of that, whether it be from a legal perspective, from a funding, policy perspective, and beyond. So that's something that's been happening. My role, especially, has been in lifting up impacts, things that are happening to nonprofits, or perhaps the transitions that folks are having to make in response to increased scrutiny or demands, et cetera. So that's something that happens on a daily basis. Moving on from there, we've maintained a weekly briefing with the governor that essentially distills some of the most key updates that have happened, biggest concerns, that folks are worried about, and essentially any actions that we can or will take or should take that we're recommending right here in Minnesota. And then lastly, this is very new. I just launched it myself this end of last month, early this month. We're right in between 2 months, so we're blurring a bit. But this fall, I launched a bi-weekly touchdown meeting for standing in the gaps, essentially. We know that there are legal implications, there are financial implications. There are all sorts of ways that we're assessing what is happening and what can be done about it. But I pride myself on making sure that we're not missing some critical gaps. So I'll give an example of that. As folks have been navigating concerns of significant or increasing food insecurity due to SNAP benefits and the concern about not being able to get those funds out to folks, which we were able to do. Conversations started really quickly with folks and representatives and leaders from the disabled community, recognizing that anytime there's a disruption to not only benefits, but even like the impact of staffing, right? For people to get from point A to point B. Not everybody has a car or is able to transport themselves to a local food bank or food shelf. And so we were having some drill down conversations that were very specific to impacted communities, to essentially talk about ways that state partners and beyond can work together to close some of those disparities or those concerns. As time goes on, I'm going to keep that time and space open. It's been a closed conversation that and a recurring time that I've wanted to ensure that folks are able to join. But if you have community-based concerns, issues that you're working through, there are a couple of different channels that you can contact the governor's office. You can either connect with myself. There's also an incredible public engagement team for specific community portfolios. And then lastly, we have a constituent services team where folks literally call, write letters, and send informations and updates all the time. And really what my job has been is doing my best to braid those insights into existing channels, but then also making space for or inviting folks to that bi-weekly touchdown if and when we're concerned about specific communities and the impacts that folks might be experiencing or that we want to prevent. All right, so with that, I also, let's see, I will advance not just my notes, but my slides over here. I also wanted to share just a bit about the scaffolding, if you will, that supports the equity and inclusion work across the enterprise. For those of you that are like, what teeth do you have? Like where does the authority for the work come from? I've gotten so many questions, y'all, about like, is your office going to exist? Do you still get to do your job in this climate? And so for those of you that are more interested in diving deeper into some of those things, the slide that I have on the screen now shares 3 executive orders that talk all about the councils that myself as Chief Equity Officer and the state's Chief Inclusion Officer work alongside, the focus and the work of those councils and what they're meant to be advancing. Excuse me. And then also the third one in particular is one of my favorites, talks about the differences between how these councils and these groups, how they've emerged, and really the needs and the focus of their work as we continue to go forth. There was one last bit that I wanted to share. Let's see. In this slide, I have some links that go to press releases, the state portal, so that folks, if you're interested in learning more about these councils, maybe you've never considered being on a council, a state council or an appointed council before. And so I did some work to just kind of link to information about those things as well, in case you want to learn more. Okay, so moving back into the federal impacts then, here in Minnesota, the bottom line when it comes to the scaffolding that really is the infrastructure that supports this work, we have, I cannot understate enough how many incredible subject matter experts and change agents that we have embedded across the state enterprise. The work of the Office of Inclusion is really meant to ensure sure that we have an inclusive workplace that reflects the communities that we're meant to be serving. They've done a heck of a job over the years doing exactly that, shifting the way that we connect with community members that are applying for employment, how we bring people in, and the types of resources that we have that support state employees that essentially are also community members or representative of communities that are most impacted. I will say, as a person myself who identifies as having a hidden disability, as a person who is served by many state agencies, it can be really challenging to both be a person who is impacted by state government, but then also a representative of state government wanting to make change within institutions while also, of course, representing whichever institution or institutions we're a part of. And I share that not as a cry or a complaint, but more so I think it's important for folks to know that the tide has started to shift. And so, comments that I hear often are like, I don't know if there's anyone that looks like me that does this work, or I'm not sure, who's receiving the complaints, concerns, ideas, that we have. And so I do think it's important for folks to know that Minnesota's doing a good job continuing to find ways to be more inclusive in our recruiting, but also most importantly that there are representatives by way of councils, enterprise ERGs, and all sorts of things. And so that's important, I think, to know as we move in this new climate, to really keep a pulse on the who are our allies, who is working from within on our behalf. And so if you're interested in any of that stuff, I would love to talk more about like the who's who. And I think in my next section, I'll get into at least a bit more of that. One more thing back to the federal impacts that I wanted to lift up. You may already be aware of these resources, but one of the first steps in reaching equitable outcomes is making sure everybody has access to critical information. And so on this slide, I have just 4 quick images that uplift the Department of Children, Youth, and Families, acronym DCYF, the Minnesota Management and Budget Agency, or MMB, Department of Human Services, or Minnesota's DHS, and then lastly, the Department of Education, aka MDE. I brought all of those for organizations, and some images to remind me of some of the recent work that they've been doing. So I'll go through left to right. DCYF has a new website or a web page up on their site, all about SNAP benefits, food security, the impacts of federal impacts, in particular shutdown, but and beyond. And so, if your work or your community or you and your family could use any of those types of resources, I wanted you to know. If you Google Minnesota Children, Youth, and Families and get to their main page website, they've done a pretty good job making sure that those pop outs or call outs are easy to find. Similarly, Minnesota Management and Budget is almost like our central office, if you will, for state agencies. They've got all sorts of information on federal funds. They have an incredible team of number nerds that do work in federal fund implementation. So think like money that comes from the federal government to states and then eventually make their way out to counties, cities, states, nonprofits, etc. And so their team that already does so much work in federal funding and federal funds implementation is doing some really incredible work trying to pull together just massive amounts of information on dollars or funds that may or may not be available, what's the status of those funds, et cetera. And so definitely take a look at the MMB website for their federal fund disruptions. I think they call it Tracker. I don't do math in public. If I'm being honest with you, talking about the dollars and cents to that granularity can be overwhelming. And yet, when we need to make decisions, when we need to better understand, it's absolutely critical information for us to have. So I encourage you definitely to take a look. I also encourage you, like I do, to tap in a friend that can help wade through some of that information. If it is daunting, it can be helpful to have either a number cruncher or a policy person alongside you that can help explain what some of that information means in real time as it relates to your work. Lastly, we've got DHS and the Medicaid Matters pages. Not everybody, a lot of people rely on Medicaid, MNsure, all the things here. Not everybody knows how it works, the impact that it has, and so on. And so, if you're a person who has been concerned about your own access to health insurance, Medicaid, or what that looks like, they've got, I want to say, 10 info pages on like grounding information about Medicaid, but then also how to advocate for it and what that's looking like. And then lastly, for those of you that are particularly concerned with educational resources, young people in school or learning settings, etc., MDE has started to pull similar information together for how federal impacts are having an impact on educational investments here in Minnesota. Whew. So maybe you knew that all those things existed. Maybe you had no idea, or you're somewhere in between. I suspect, I definitely can't predict the future, but I suspect that agencies will continue, to pull together resources as needs emerge, and information and ways of sharing it become available. But I definitely wanted to make sure that I at least curated a quick slide on some of those things. I would also encourage you, if you start to look for something and you don't see it, to reach out to teams that are creating these resources. Feel free to reach out to me if you can't track down those folks, because ultimately, now more than ever, the need to center real people, community voice, community leaders. I think that's like the one silver lining in a time that's as challenging as this, is that the need to ensure that we make space for community voice to be a part of understanding new realities, but also how we make solutions going forward. That it is the times that we are in. So please take a look at all those things, any and all of those things. Ask questions if you have them. Please share ideas if you have them as well. Okay, now that we covered, the thing that touches everything that all of us do, I would imagine, I will get into a little bit more of the like equity inclusion work that's happening across the state specifically. So this section is really meant to talk just a bit about some key tools, some key resources, and the ecosystem of state experts or equity nerds that I get to work with on a regular basis. For folks on the call, going back to that question that I get asked often, are you allowed to do your work? What's happening in the equity space? So many questions just about like, will your office get to continue and so on. I like to share the slide that's on the board with the partners that I work with community members, and anyone in between. Minnesota leads the nation in data-informed decision and policy making, which is very nerdy, but a lesser known fact that we do really intentional work with policy directors and leaders across the enterprise to ensure that we're using emerging tools and real data sets, both numbers as well as lived experiences, to inform what we're doing or what we're deciding or what we're building and so on. And that is not illegal. And that is very much compliant with state and federal laws. And that's that second point that so many folks have had questions about. Ensuring access to opportunity is absolutely compliant with state and federal laws. We're living in a time where there is misinformation, disinformation, and maybe some confusion about that. undoubtedly folks are needing to be very intentional about how we describe the work that we do. It is certainly, there's like with regard to misinformation, folks getting mixed up a little bit on the work that they're doing and whether or not it can continue as well. And so one thing I'll say, a spicy opinion as an equity practitioner, you know, we are done with the 2020 book clubs. Gone are the times of fluffy language like that. Frankly, was never helpful anyway, beyond getting folks galvanized around a focused, like shared goal. But now is the time for us to do our homework, right? Like now is the time for us to really understand the legalities that do support remaining in compliance with state or federal law. So what does that mean? That means if you're doing hiring work, that you're really grounded in employment law and equal opportunity. That means if you're maybe a hiring manager, that you do know the Americans with Disabilities Act and what your responsibilities are in that space. That means that we're taking responsibility for the small ways, the big and small ways, that we can make our work more accessible to people. Maybe it's language translation or ensuring that we have multiple formats available for folks. And so I like to remind people that no, this work is not illegal, and it is our responsibility to make sure that we are grounding it in the laws that it's meant to uphold, that we move with specificity when it comes to things like recruiting or decision making, policy making, and so on. And then lastly, in honor of Senator Paul Wellstone, the quote that we all love to share: when we all do better, we all do better. But that means that we actually have to be making an effort to ensure that that's happening. And so ideally, the work of equity, opportunity, and access across the state, whether I'm advancing it, you're advancing it, or we're doing that work together, it's important that we know how it's going and if it's actually working. And so in an homage to the great senator, but also a call to action to all of us, this time really requires us to be clear-eyed about what we're trying to accomplish, who it's meant to serve, and how we're going to get it done. All right, so who have I been working with? I love this slide. In the middle are just some screenshotted or excuse me, thumbnail logos rather, of some of the organizations and entities I'm working with most closely presently. We move fast at the speed of light, I would say, in the governor's office. As you can imagine, the volume of opinions and constituents and sometimes like late breaking news. I mean, it's just like nonstop lightning speed all the time. And I love it. I love moving quickly, but I also love making sure that the work that I advance supports real people, that uses the best of what we have. And ultimately, the short way of saying that is I grew up too poor to let things go to waste. And so the group or the constellation of folks that I'm working with moves quickly depending on what we're focusing on. And right now, what that looks like are folks like Metro Transit helping to remove barriers to some engagements and convenings that we've got coming up. In the bottom right, there's a little image that represents community engagement practitioners from 19, I want to say, different state agencies, folks that are like really carrying the relationships, community relationships, with and alongside their agencies. I work with a lot of like educational institutions such as the Science Museum, historical societies, because y'all, I can't be the only one that's been getting the common kind of phrase or assertion like, I can't believe we're here, how did we get here? And that tells me that we've got some work to do across institutions, across industries, to make sure that we don't lose the how we got here. So I'll give you another example of that. Medicaid Matters, one of those pages that I shared from the Department of Human Services. I used to be an employee of DHS. We've often known about the importance of Medicaid, of people having access to healthcare, the connection between how healthcare and healthy people leads to safer communities, right? Greater prosperity across communities. The list goes on and on. And this time has really illustrated how critical it is for state agencies and really all of us as a collective to be more effective at telling that story and making sure that folks do understand not only services or agencies that do important work, but how their tax dollars, right, go to work and the impact that they can have. And so I've really loved working alongside spaces like the Historical Society, the Science Museum, and others, right alongside state agencies to dig into, again, how are we truth telling? How are we sharing those stories? And ultimately, how are we sharing the work of state government in a way that people can understand, form opinions about, and be effective in when it comes to advocacy or whatever work it is that they're wanting to advance for themselves, their families, their communities, and beyond. Let's see. Um, let's see. I'll share one nerdy bit about me, and then I'll zoom out to some of the partners that are on the outside of the circle. Um, in my work as Chief Equity Officer, I mentioned this at the top. My job is translating community priorities into systems change. We get so many questions as equity practitioners. Chow and I were just talking about that. People are like, what is that? What is, like, your work seems so important, but what does that mean? What does it look like? Literally, what do you do all day? And so, some words, some buckets that I've been sharing with people that might make a little bit more sense, especially as we're talking about. Some of you might be in the public sector. Some of you might be artists. I don't know, journalists. Any number of things. And so, to use language that's common, maybe across different work spaces, I work to advance continuous improvement. So essentially, being more effective at engagement work or understanding community priorities in state government. I love doing customer experience work. So amplifying the incredible work that our technologists are doing in the IT space. And then in this coming year, continuing to work alongside two teams in particular that are working on state procurement, and then also grant management as well. So much work has happened already, and what my role will be there is truly advancing and continuing to support what they're learning, what they're seeing, making sure people know about it and beyond. Third bucket that I work in to answer the what the heck, like what do you do all day, is systems change work. So our public engagement team at the governor's office does amazing work, staying connected to communities, being proactive, getting out and bringing proclamations to community organizations, honoring community leaders, being present when community organizations are facing challenges and needing support, guidance, connections, and beyond. They also have what's called a constituent services team that I mentioned, and they're like the who you would think of when you send a letter, if you request a proclamation or something like that. In the work that I get to advance, in addition to reacting to folks that are on the phone, maybe a big concern that folks are having, or getting out and really managing relationships and connections. My eyes are on the future. What are we doing differently? What are we doing better? How are we taking all of that information in, responding to it in real time with what folks are, individuals or coalitions are asking for in the now. But then my work is also carrying that ball. I really should not use sports analogies, but carrying that ball towards the end zone of new and improved. So maybe it is different policies. It could be different initiatives that are happening across the enterprise, different partnerships. But thinking about the system as we know it and making changes to it for the ongoing future. Let's see. I will wrap up this slide with the who you gotta know if you don't work for the state. Some organization, or excuse me, some teams and departments that I think are really important for folks to know exist. No matter what. So the first, I'll start on the right side of the slide, and that is the Office of Equitable Procurement. If you are a business owner, if you are, or you have anything to do with like economic mobility, you know, folks that are solopreneurs, small business owners, etc. We talk a lot about turning the tide and making Minnesota a great place to grow up, a great place to do business. And part of that means making sure that folks have access to capital and opportunities in the space of entrepreneurship. They are incredible. They do so much cool work to get out and meet business owners, meet people who are like emerging, you know, or interested in owning a business and getting folks connected with the tools and programs that they need, depending on where they are in that journey. The next one that I want to make sure I read out loud is the Office of Grants Management. They live with the Office of Equitable Procurement over in the Department of Administration. What you got to know about them is they make the rules, if you will, for grant making across state agencies. But my favorite thing that they've got going is grant reform work in partnership with the Minnesota Council of Nonprofits. Again, some of that kind of dreaming forward, you know, we can identify challenges and problems all day, and we should with specificity. But what I love about that group, and really all of the ones that I'm lifting up, is that they are, in addition, they are working on solutions and creating solutions, co-creating solutions for some of those challenges. Last up, the Office of, it's called Transformation and Strategy Delivery. They are in our IT space. We can't do anything these days without computers or phones or something dinging, chiming, bing, bling, blinging in our eyes, in our ears all the time. And that is what some of their work is. How are we using technology for good? How are we using the technology that we have to get the word out more effectively? How do we also make sure that we're not just hoping that technology is the end all be all solution, and we're making sure that it is dispersed equitably and that it's accessible as well? So really, really appreciate that they're like my Star Trek friends. You know, they're the people that not only can envision a future that's different, but also have they call it hands-on keyboard skills to bring it to life, which is really cool. They've done tons of work working with agencies to understand their community's priorities and then turning that into real solutions. So if you have any interest in tech nerdy stuff, I highly recommend checking out Minute's website and finding some of that transformation work that they've got going. Let's see. Three last groups that I will share about more quickly, that I kind of, you know, I join when I can and support when I can when I'm needed, but I'm a huge champion of their work. First up, there is a group called the Disability Agency Forum. In short, that is all of the state organizations that are doing disability related work. There's like at least half a dozen, if not more. Chow, I think I should send that in an email. But I'll give you some examples from my heart memory. State Services for the Blind is part of that group. The Chief Accessibility Officer for the state of Minnesota is in that group. The Council on Developmental Disabilities, Voc Rehab Services, and the list just goes on and on. And so the cool thing about that group, again, is that they are state organizations or you know, state appointed councils, state resources, etc. They make our work better and more effective across the state, but most importantly, they serve real Minnesotans, and they have deep relationships and subject matter expertise there. So I'll be sure to tap that in. Don't let me forget, Chow, to make sure that I name those organizations, because if you have folks in the work that you do that require accommodations, if you in your own work are wanting to ensure that you're reaching people most effectively and in the most accessible way, there are just, I could go on and on about the amazingness that folks have there. State ethnic councils, you may be familiar with, but if you are not, I've had the privilege of learning so much more deeply about what they do all day behind the scenes, especially from this vantage point. So if you didn't know, there's something called state ethnic and cultural councils. One of them that I work with often is called the Council of Minnesotans of African Heritage. There are, I want to say, six who support culturally and politically disenfranchised groups. Their work is amazing. They have all sorts of gatherings that are meant to serve specific communities, to speak to and improve specific impact areas. They've got leadership. I think we actually might have somebody from a state ethnic council on this call, if I'm not mistaken. And so, especially when I'm done with my presentation, I would love to make some space if she wants to share it all about some of their work. But there are at least six, maybe even seven, state ethnic and cultural councils that work on behalf of specific communities to ensure, again, that the work of state government, that policy, and beyond is improving the lives of all Minnesotans, especially those that have community specific, cultural specific barriers. So if you haven't heard about them, I encourage you to check them out. I'll link that one as well, Chow. And I would say, if you're a person who like maybe you don't have tons of time to be on a council, maybe tap into the newsletters or find ways to stay plugged into the work that they're doing because they have loud amplifiers and welcome feedback. And then last but not least is a group that I am an executive sponsor for, and that is the Community Engagement Practitioners Group. Again, equity practitioners from at least 19 state agencies and counting. They're a self-organizing group of state employees that essentially care deeply for community and happen to spend a lot of their working time advancing their agency's mission, but then also bringing it to specific communities as well. And so what I'm about to share next has a lot of their handprints written all over it. Thank you for the time check. Ciao. So all of that, all of what I shared was hopefully me proving the professional hype woman that I claim to be, and really just get folks excited and in the know, honestly, about federal response work, organizations and entities all across state government that are doing really great work, but maybe that the work hasn't made its way to you or to your inbox just yet. I will close with just a few slides on work that I'm doing with some of those groups. And then I'd like to land this plane on ways that you can get involved if you're interested or have questions, and then open up for your own questions and responses. I've already shared my office vision, so I'm going to tap through that, though I love that photo. I'm also going to tap right past the slide that I have up that breaks down the convenings that I lead. Due to time, the slide that I'm also going to advance past is honestly a flex of all the different concurrent projects that I've got going that I'll share more about in a slide or two here. But ultimately, the work that I lead with some of those incredible groups is all about amplifying community, closing specific disparities, and then elevating our standards. So like, what are the rules and where are the teeth? What are some of the tools that will help us advance better work and more consistent engagement work across the state? So I will not get into every single project or priority, but when you get slides, feel free at any point in time if you want to reach out or ask questions about anything I've got going. I talk more than I'd like to admit on this kind of stuff. So if you want to nerd out with me, I'm definitely game. Okay. Last couple slides that I wanted to share. This is just a shout out to Chow and all of the amazing folks that joined me for a stop in the listening tour in the city of Rochester. One of those convenings that I mentioned that I lead is getting out and about in the state of Minnesota, away from the Twin Cities or the, the what do they call it, first rung suburbs or whatever, and making sure that geographically where people are and what they're facing and navigating and advancing right in their own neck of the woods is something that I like to make sure that I hold space for. And I also, as a unscientific but very effective measure of effective community engagement or the success of a convening is like how many selfies people take. And this was like a participant initiated selfie, and we were all obviously just like happy and excited to take it. Which, more importantly, the photo that I'm sharing shows a group of, what is this, 8, 9, maybe 10 people smiling big, and looking what I would call like re-energized. And that's what this work is all about. It can be challenging, it can be sometimes overwhelming, being like, I thought we were doing good work, but we want to do something better, or we want to avoid this crisis, or dig into this like intense federal data. The work can be tough at times. It literally is about like improving lives, sustaining lives at times. And so to come to a space and to talk about all those things, and to leave with smiles like this, I think just shows the power of making space for different perspectives, making sure that we all have a voice at the table. So enough about this amazing selfie that I can't stop talking about. Let's see. For more about the convenings that I've been leading and what we've, yes. I will pause right now, even though I'm not supposed to mention what's in the chat, but I'm going to do it. For folks that are viewing this recording, there's a shout out in the chat to amazing Akla, who were our hosts. Thank you for naming that, Chow. And thank you again to Akla and the participants and leaders that were incredible hosts. I can't come through and pull up and be effective making connections without partners like Akla and folks on the ground that know folks well, that know who and where to make space. So thank you so much for that reminder, Chow. And thank you so much to Akla for everything you did to make that stop or that day a success. To learn more about the convenings that I have been leading, I will make sure that you all have access to my website. But as I've mentioned, they've been about kind of those 3 buckets that I talked about. We're wanting to lean into continuous improvement. We're wanting to lean into consistent practices, across the system, and really wanting to use community feedback to enhance or inform how and where we can make systems change adjustments as well. And so the next couple of slides will just show a few images of how some of that work has gone. And looking at time, let's see, where do I want to land this plane with you all? I'm going to land here for just a second. It is a QR code that I want you all to have. That's not where we want, that is where we want it to go. There we go. I've got a QR code on the screen that will bring you to the Equity Office's link tree. There's oodles of stuff on there. There is the website page, information about convenings, registrations for upcoming events, and definitely, I think I mentioned this, a link to the website, which has a deeper dive on some of the convenings, initiatives, and so on. The last thing I'll plug before I slow it down and open up for questions is that you'll also see in that link tree a sign in if you're interested in getting the monthly newsletter from the Equity Office. I do my best to summarize about a month's work of excitement and advancements and progress in all of those areas that I was talking about. So if you're particularly interested in some of the projects or initiatives that are happening or that are coming soon, I would love for you to subscribe to that newsletter so that you can stay tuned on when all those things happen. Okay. Now I'm going to slow it down. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, but keep it handy in case folks want to call back or go back to anything. But I talked a lot and I talked quick about federal impact resources, about some really incredible leaders across the state that are advancing critical work that might be helpful to you. And then I gave a teaser, I would say, in some of the initiatives that I'm leading. But in all of that, I'm curious if anything stood out or if you have any curiosities or questions that I can respond to or clarify.
And please feel free to utilize the chat if that is the option that works best for you. Otherwise, feel free to unmute, raise your hand, whatever works for you. We're really great at pausing awkwardly to make sure everyone can
That's
hear.
okay. Listen, I'm a neurodivergent presenter. So what that means is y'all got, I mean, at least a year and a half's worth of work in 40 minutes, super speed, and we all process in different ways. So if you're soaking it all in quietly, that's okay too. But I do see a face and a mic on. Hi there.
I guess it's maybe me, huh? Can you hear me?
Yes, it's you.
Yeah, Alan. And I'm familiar with the Asian Council, and then I'm also following the progress of other councils as well. The question I have is, in your role, how do you ensure that these councils are sharing their best practices and results and ensure that they don't just simply work on their own silo mode? That really is.
Yes.
Yeah. What is your role in that regard? Right?
Thank you for that question. So this year, I would say we've all been in a sprint, in a sprint and a scramble, responding to emerging community needs and all those things. Um, I have in my first year, I will say, as chief equity officer, I've had the privilege of first just learning alongside the work that they're advancing, the approaches that they're taking and stuff like that. But I am excited to share that in this coming year, an opportunity that we've talked about in passing when we see each other and when we've been able to share space is convening on like at least a quarterly basis, like this moment, to slow things down, to talk through, not only the approaches that are working across communities, but especially shared priorities, as folks are heads down digging into the work that they advance for specific communities, wanting to make sure I'm doing a good job synthesizing that information and sharing it back. So I'm so glad that you lifted this question. In addition to my role, I would say that the council leaders and members do a great job. I mean, like they're in the weeds, in all the time, and are in communication often. I'm excited in this next year to go beyond some of the more formal, legislative process things and make space for that thinking time and that sharing time. So thank you for that question.
Thank you.
Other folks have any questions or even reflections on the information that Ashley shared with us today?
While you're marinating, I'm going to use a couple of minutes, Chow, to brag.
Okay.
And by brag, I mean hopefully make at least a few people interested in what I'm about to share so that you can use it. The state of Minnesota, and this will be a link that I share with you all. In addition to that amazing ecosystem of partners and subject matter experts that do great work, that are oftentimes representatives of the communities that they serve. In addition, we've created a lot of tools. And so one example of that I will definitely be including is the State of Minnesota Equity Analysis Tool. In your work, it may or may not be helpful. You might already be deeply in the cultural understanding or practices needed to advance the work that you do in an equitable way. But if you are a person who maybe has struggled at times to kind of like connect the dots, or if you're wanting to advance work more equitably or efficiently, really, in your area of expertise, there's a tool that we've designed based on the Government Alliance on Racial Equities model, and it works. It's the power of using tools to think differently and more intentionally and more inclusively is really amazing to behold when you're a part of it or supporting teams with it. So that's one tool that exists already that I wanted folks to know about in case it's helpful to you. And then the brag, the not so humble brag, is that in addition, there are additional resources on the way related to engaging effectively across communities. So making sure that we do our best work and we do our homework as we're preparing to engage with communities across differences and diasporas. And then let's see, lastly, I think I should come back sometime, Chow, or maybe just share an email that you can share with this team when it becomes available. But one of the things that you might want to subscribe to the newsletter about is something called the Equity Story Mapping Project. And that's really all about bringing data visibility to the same place at the same time. Because, we as the state have access to data, people outside of the state and organizers lean into data sets. We've got qualitative information we're taking in, and ultimately, how can you level the playing field if we don't all have at least a shared understanding of the problems that we're trying to solve? So I will leave it there so that I don't accidentally go over time, but want to make sure that I highlighted at least some of the best tools that are available and emerging.
I will be sure to share that resource with everyone, so hopefully you can subscribe to that. Do want to share a reflection that's on the chat from Councilmember Keene, who had to leave. He said it's good to get an overview of what's happening or helping at the state level. The other question that you don't have to answer, but maybe you can reflect on and get back to us if you don't have a quick 1-minute answer, is it struck me in your presentation that you shared that Minnesota leads the nation in using data-informed practices. And then we also almost lead the nation in disparities. And that is incongruent. So I am curious about how that is actually possible. So you can give the quick snapshot answer and then maybe provide us a broader one at a different date. But that was just astounding to me.
Yes, absolutely. So the short answer is by implementing shared tools across, by structuring and scaffolding, you may have heard of things like the Children's Cabinet or the Health Sub Cabinet. The short answer is the One Minnesota budget policy planning process and implementation is nation leading, award winning, and the beginning of closing those exact gaps. And so thank you for asking that question and clarifying. There is still generations of work to do with regard to closing those disparities. But what we know is that moving with specificity, leaning into reality, such as existing research, not deleting databases, for example. And then most importantly, not just relying on numbers and experts, but also having a significant emphasis on people who are most impacted and centering community voice and experience in all that is the shift that I would say is nation leading. And now we have to keep putting the pedal to the floor to watch it work and close those disparities. Thank you for that question.
No problem. Thank you, Ashley. And I'm being conscious of time. It's about 12:59. And I know folks probably have 1 o'clock meetings. So if you do have additional questions or thoughts or reflections, please share them with Wafa or myself, and we'll make sure we get back to you with any responses. Do want to highlight upcoming event this Saturday, November 15th from 5 to 10 p.m. is the NAACP annual gala. If you are interested in participating, if you go to their website, you can purchase a ticket. I did also note that in the chat, someone did mention the convening on November 19th at the Edison building at 5 p.m. To kind of hear from what they have gathered specific to multilingual learners. So that opportunity exists as well. Want to note that our next episode is December 10th, 2025 at noon. As usual, bring yourself as you are, enjoy lunch with us, and listen to our next presenter, and we'll share that information shortly. And with that, we just want to extend gratitude to everyone that has been able to join us today. Thank you so much to Ashley for all of the information. We'll be making sure that we send that out to everyone who participated today, along with the presentation that she shared. Have a good week to everyone, and hope to see you in December.